We are talking about the age of Lucifer. We're talking about from the scientific perspective and from the biblical perspective, all the way through to Lucifer's flood. The question is, do we have any science on Lucifer's flood?
We have dinosaurs in this era, very, very old fossils.
Yes.
We have the Big Bang, possibly at the beginning of it.
We have proof on this earth today in South Africa. We have a 50 million year old footprint.
I'm Tricia Flagg, and I'm here with my husband, John Flagg, the author of the Lucifer Project. This podcast is a follow-up to the one we did previously about the age of the earth.
That's right.
Now, you were talking about the science and where the Bible is versus the science, and you came to the conclusion that you believe in something called the gap theory.
That's right. So, we talked about in that last podcast how there was a major disaster that kind of hit the planet between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, and how that aligns up with the scientific age of the earth. And so we're going to be talking a little bit, well, not a little bit, we're going to go right into that age. I like to call it the epoch of Lucifer, or the age of Lucifer. It's from basically the beginning of everything, like the start of the universe, all the way through to, and I know we mentioned this briefly, this thing called Lucifer's flood. We're going to be covering that entire era of time,
right.
And we're going to do it again, both scientifically and also scripturally. So it's going to be really, really interesting. I think we're going to give a lot of information to some people that just may not be aware of this stuff. But before we do, babe, right. I really want to start just talking about why should somebody who's maybe not a Christian care. I mean, I could see why they watched or listened to our first podcast and found it interesting. The age of the earth, it was interesting. But if I don't believe in the Bible, or I don't believe in God, and hear these two talking about Scripture again, like, why should they continue to listen to us? And I think we need to address that head on, because I personally think a lot of people who say that they don't believe in this spiritual realm. Maybe I can see why maybe they don't believe in God, but they say, I don't believe in this spiritual realm either. I want to challenge that before we get started,
right.
Because today's podcast is going to be about this age of Lucifer, and it's a period of time where there was a major crossover between that spirit realm and the physical realm. And so I want to address that. I think we need to talk about, do people believe in this spiritual realm without even realizing it?
Right.
So I want to start off asking you a question. Do you believe in a spiritual realm?
I do.
And why?
I definitely believe. Well, I've told you this several times, like, I start with that spiritual realm from the vantage point of the human consciousness. We know right from wrong. Mm-hmm. Well, why? What gave us like the idea that something is evil and something is good? And so I look at it, if we didn't have this measurement or this understanding of good and evil, then we wouldn't recognize evil. We couldn't call anything evil. There would have to be something that we would consider to be good.
Right, because if we were without good, everything would just be neutral, right?
Right.
Evil would be neutral, good would be neutral, everything would be neutral. But when you see evil, that must mean that there is also a good.
Right. And so I think ultimate evil would want to keep you from something good, right? Mm. So right now there's we can look, I'm sure evil has always existed, or at least what we would believe since the fall of man. But I guess we even talked about before you're getting into it, that it was even before the fall of man, right?
Mm-hmm.
With Lucifer. But as today, I see evil in the world is so prevalent. It's so, like, I'm seeing things I never thought in my lifetime I would ever, witness or see, like on the news, and what people would do, and how some people celebrate absolute evil that I can't even fathom, in my mind. So it makes me feel like the greater there is the evil, it's almost like there's got to be this greater good rising. Otherwise, why would there be an evil that would
affect the earth like it is?
Yeah, okay. You can help me out with this, but you understand what I'm saying?
Right, you're taking a philosophical approach to it.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's almost like the evil is threatened by the good. Why, in my mind, why else would it
So
exist?
you're saying there's this fact that there's good and the fact that there's evil really is proof to you that there is this spiritual realm that is crossing over and affecting the physical realm in which we operate and see on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I know it sounds confusing, but to make it simplistic, it's look at a child. You don't have to teach a child to be bad, right? A child like instinctively knows to lie or to manipulate mom and dad, like or to do something like that. Usually we have to correct those behaviors, and we want the child to act in a respectful manner and a good behaviors and things like that. You don't have to train that in a child. No one has to teach someone to be bad. So where did that come from? Where did that consciousness come from? You don't see it in the animal world. That's neutral. In nature, it's neutral. So you might say, oh, well, hurricane's evil or something. Well, it's neutral. It's about weather patterns and climate and things like that.
Okay.
Or like the circle of life with a lion or something like that. But mankind, it's different.
Gotcha.
It's a consciousness of right and wrong. There's got to be, in my perspective, there's got to be a spiritual entity to that conclusion or to that reason.
Okay. So I'll explain my position in a second here, but what you're kind of saying is there's almost like the Marvel multiverse, right? So we have this spiritual world and we have this physical world, and they both kind of exist at the same time. And and that there is, as I mentioned earlier, especially in this age of Lucifer, we're going to talk about, there is crossover between these two. So from my perspective, why I believe there's a spiritual world is way before I was ever a Christian. Of course, the Bible is full of crossover between the spiritual realm and the physical realm. But I wasn't even a Christian, but I believe in this spiritual world. And I didn't believe in God, but and if somebody would ask me, did I believe in the spirit world, I'd probably say no. But the reality is, I would go watch like these ghost hunter television shows, and I'd get those tingles up my spine when you'd see things and you're like, oh, man, are ghosts real? And I remember one time I was messing with a Ouija board. I didn't know anything about anything,
unwise.
right? But yeah, it is unwise. But like you start getting creeped out a little bit you just get these weird feelings. And I remember I used to work night shift early on in my career. And as I drive, I'd up to work late at night. There's just one show that would just talk about all these real creepy spiritual things that people experience. And I'm like, ooh, it gets me, creeped out. And maybe we can throw in there other witchcraft. We can throw in there the palm readers, right? Or maybe they actually were seances where things happen that you can't explain, right? All those things.
Or like a psychic knowing
right.
about something, about a person. I know a lot of them are, scams and things like that. But I think a lot of people experience like, hey, that person could not have known XYZ or something in my life.
So to kind of land this thing before we get started with the age of Lucifer, I think a lot of people, whether they believe it or not, so if you're a Christian, obviously you believe the existence of this spiritual realm. If you're an agnostic, I think a lot of agnostics believe in it. They may not even realize it, but when you have things like ghosts and seances and Ouija boards and stuff like that, I think a lot of agnostics do believe in those things. And there's only one book that I know of that really well describes this spiritual realm, and it kind of addresses all of those things, and it's called the Bible. So I think, and unfortunately, those agnostics are kind of believing in the bad side of this spiritual realm, and often don't believe in the good side. That's up to them. That's their own individual choice. But I would say that I think a lot of agnostics do believe there's in this spiritual realm. And even when it comes to our atheist friends, when you see this ultimate evil, like you were talking about, in operation, doesn't that also mean there just might be a spirit realm out there affecting that and causing that, because it's not human nature to be that evil? So we're going to kind of land that there for a second. That's the reason why I think people who may not believe in God should just continue to listen, because I do think there's a lot of them that do believe in this spiritual realm. They may not know it. And so just continue to listen. And we'll talk about the science. We'll talk about the spirit realm, how they interact with each other on this podcast and some in the future. And I think we're all going to learn from it. And I think we'll have a lot of fun.
Right. And I just want to add real quick, we focused a lot on evil, but there's also a side of mankind that does good things that you can't explain. Like, why would someone, risk their own life to save a stranger? But we hear about those stories a lot.
Yeah, it's the ultimate evil and the ultimate love. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so let's get started. We are talking about the age of Lucifer. We're talking about from the scientific perspective and from the biblical perspective. And we're going from the beginning of everything as we know, the beginning of the universe, the beginning of the cosmos, all the way through to Lucifer's flood. We know from our last podcast that the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. So now we're going to back it up even farther to the beginning of beginnings. Okay.
Beginning of beginnings. Okay.
Right. So let's just start on the biblical side, because it's really easy. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. All right. So God created it. We're just going to leave it there for a second. Let's go over to what science says about the beginning of the earth, because I find this super fascinating. So prior to 1931, kind of started in the 1200 era and all the way up into 1931, the science community kind of just called it the steady state universe. And what they felt was everything that we see up in the universe always was, it had no beginning, it always was and always will be. And they just called it this steady state. And over the years, over the hundreds of years, they adjusted their models and whatnot, and they knew that matter was being created and whatnot. But basically, still they landed on there was never a beginning, there was never an end. It always just is. It's a steady state model, and I find that super interesting because it makes it really easy on the science community. We don't have to figure out where life began; it just always was.
Right.
Right. So it's super easy, right? So in 1931, there's this Belgian scientist. He was a physicist, and he was also, interesting enough, a Catholic priest. And in 1931, his name's George Lemaitre or something. I'm sure I'm butchering the name, but he was the first one to theorize that no, there was a start to the universe. He didn't give it a name or anything, but he said no, the universe had a start, and it launched everything that we know into existence. And he actually formulated some things that would have to be in place for that to be true. One of was that the universe or the galaxies are constantly moving away from each other. Can you imagine if there's this, start, everything's shooting out away from each other. So there has to be distance between, an opening distance between galaxies. And there has to be a constant radiation all throughout the known universe. Well, they couldn't measure any of these things back then. And it was just kind of there. So he said, there was a start to all this. And the science community at that time made complete fun of this guy. They mocked him because they said, again, in 1931, they said, this is the priest part of you coming out. If there has to be a beginning to the universe, right, then what does that tell us?
There was an opening for a God whole or a creator.
Exactly right. They made fun of this guy because they're saying, you're just coming up with this theory of yours because you want to prove that there is a God.
Right. It leaves room for the idea that there was a creator.
Yeah,
or
not even leaves room. It kind of forces that there is a creator. Right. Somebody had to launch that beginning into he had to start it. And so it almost proves that there's a God. So they made fun of this guy. They mocked him mercilessly. And so what's interesting is now we progress a few years, 1949. Okay, so we're 18 years later. What's this guy's name? Fred Hoyle. He's an Englishman. He was on a BBC broadcast, and he was making fun of this idea that there was a start. He was a steady state universe guy, and he was making fun of this fact that there was a start. And he was like, and he was the first one to term the Big Bang. And he said, this Big Bang theory. He was making fun of it. And interesting enough, 15 years go by, now we're in the 60s, and they can actually start to measure the things that this original Belgian George Lemaitre, what he said, these original things that he said, they can actually start measuring them now.
Right.
And they quickly start to realize, it's real. And they measured, they were able to identify that there is this background microwave radiation all throughout the known galaxy. known galaxies, throughout the universe. They were able to measure it now. And they also figured out that these galaxies are moving apart from each other and very rapidly. And so over time, over the 60s and the 1970s and in the early 1980s, by that point, everybody has moved over in this fields of astrology and cosmology. They've now moved over to the fact that there was, in fact, a Big Bang. And they took the term that this guy used as a pejorative back in the 1940s to make fun of this whole thing. Now that's become the term that we use for it.
1930s.
Well, in the 1940s, he made fun of the idea that came up in the 1930s, right? Yeah. So what's interesting about this is this George guy was made fun of because it kind of proved, if you will, the existence of a God, because this God had to launch and initiate this start, which we now call the Big Bang. And now here we are, and I don't know about you, when I went to school and I went to college, did anybody ever tell you, you were taught about the Big Bang, I assume?
Yeah, of course.
Were you ever taught that it kind of proves, if you will, that there has to be a God?
No.
Yeah, me neither.
No.
But isn't it interesting? But all the 1930s and 1940s, they made fun of this idea because it proved that there's a God. And now we've proven out this very idea, but now we say that it has nothing to do with God.
I believe it has something to do with God.
Yeah, I do too. But anyways, it's just an interesting perspective. So, okay, let's rapid fire through the science side of this thing now. So the scientists say, based on all their measurements, that this occurred 13.8 billion years ago. And of course, we know that the Earth kind of has left its primordial state and became the Earth as we kind of know it 4.5 billion years ago. So we have this 8 billion year gap between the Big Bang and the Earth being formed. And, there's a ton of science behind it, but just a high level is that's, as the matter and antimatter and dark matter, all this stuff is going out, and it's the gravity's forming planetary bodies and they're crashing together. And so anyways, we have 8 billion years of all that kind of stuff. 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth is formed as we know it. So that's kind of and of course on the Earth, then somehow life begins. Science has never been able to prove how life begins. But we have life beginning on the planet Earth. We have dinosaurs, of course, and we have mankind-ish. We have the Homo sapiens and Homo series and all these different things, and Neanderthal man and all that. And all that was about 3 to 5 million years ago. So that's kind of just a real high level, like what science says about this whole age. Really what we want to spend our time with today is, what does the Bible say happened during all of this? Because I think we're going to find that really interesting. So we have the Big Bang. In the beginning, God created heavens and earth. That's Genesis 1:1. We don't get anything in the Bible until Genesis 1:2, which was, and the earth was without void and formless, and darkness covered the face of the deep, right? And we talked about how that's a destroyed planet. Well, what's going on in that gap right there? Well, okay, so here we go. The Bible says when we leave that Genesis area and we jump over to Isaiah and we jump over to Ezekiel, if people ever want to read this, he had a relationship with Lucifer. Lucifer is an angel. We don't know if he's an archangel or not. There's only 4 angels named by name in the Bible. Lucifer is one of them. So apparently he's somebody important. So Lucifer is made protector of planet Earth by God. Now, when did this happen? Did this happen all the way back at the beginning of the beginnings with the Big Bang? We don't know.
We don't know.
Did it come when the Earth was formed 4.5 billion years ago? We don't know. Did it happen when life was first created on the planet? Nobody knows. But what we do know is that Lucifer was called protector of the planet Earth. So he's set in place, and we have life. And again, we just don't know when, but we have life on this planet. But what's interesting is Lucifer's reigning over this Earth, right, as our protector. And so, is evolution going on? So the earliest fossils we have on Earth of like plants are 3.7 billion years old. And of course, as I said earlier, our earliest humanoids are like 2 to 5 million years old. So Lucifer could have been in charge for all of this time.
Right.
Right. And so was he managing evolution? I know a lot of Christians have a problem with evolution, but I personally don't. Was Lucifer reigning from his throne wherever that was and just kind of making sure that evolution was going the way that God wanted it? We really don't know, do we? But
Yeah, I have no idea.
but eventually he starts to get lifted up in pride. Okay, well, what's he lifted up in pride about? And again, as we mentioned in our first podcast, Lucifer had a throne. Thrones always mean authority. Thrones always mean rulership. I made the statement that there was mankind before Adam and Eve. I know that's against most Christian theory, but people who don't believe that there was a race before Adam and Eve, I will encourage them to read Genesis 1:28. If you read it in everything but the King James Version, it says, God blessed mankind and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. I would encourage everyone to pull up their Bible or go on an app and pull up the King James Version. And it says, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth.
Right. Big difference.
Big difference. So the King James is very clearly stating that there was, in fact, mankind before Adam and Eve. And after all the bad stuff, then God had to refill the earth after all the stuff that we're going to be getting into here shortly. So again, there's just a more biblical proof that there was, in fact, a race before Adam and Eve. It's called the pre-Adamic race. The pre-Adamic races were in the age of Lucifer. So we continue on. Okay, so now we have Lucifer looking out over the earth. There is some type of mankind here. Okay, my personal belief, I do think that Lucifer was helping manage evolution. I do think Lucifer was taking apes, taking orangutans, taking the things that Christians don't want to believe, took part in evolution, but we have so much scientific data to say that they existed. I think Lucifer was doing that. Was it doing that with God, or was he doing that against God, and God didn't want that to happen?
You may, when you're like saying like he possibly was causing like interspecies like relations, things like that. Is that what you're saying? Like instead of everything just kind of staying in its own lane?
Right. So you could imagine we have this world, we have life. Lucifer's over top of it. Lucifer's like, hey, look at the brain power of these apes. I'm just going to call them apes. And hey, wouldn't it be great if we could just keep breeding these apes and make them into something even more? They have this amazing brain capacity. Let's make it even better. And let's breed them and breed them and breed them and breed them. We've got millions and millions and millions of years of Lucifer. Could he be doing this? Could he be the reason mankind is the way that it is today? Could have been outside of the will of God, or could have been within the will of God. I doubt that. But again, we just don't know.
Well, I would want to challenge that when God, like, we live in a corrupted world, but when God made the Garden of Eden in that recreation story you talked about, and God formed Adam and Eve, and God breathed into Adam and Eve, I would say it's a new creation. Like that was, the old is passed away at that point. So I don't believe that there was any intent of God to continue what Lucifer had been doing. However, it was the initial start was God's creation. It was God's creation. So some of the laws or properties that God had, going, I would say we would see similar today, as far as like plant life and growing and things like that. But I would assume that during this age of Lucifer, there was some kind of corruption that took place.
Right. So let's talk about the corruption, because that's really where this all starts to go south. So my point was, we don't know, was Lucifer managing mankind's evolution? We don't know. But there's so much evidence to say that, yes, there was evolution. Yes, man, back then, that version of man was grown up from apes. There's just too much data to deny that as Christians. But it doesn't mean we have to say Adam and Eve were the same. Right? Because that's a recreation. It's going to happen much later.
Right.
So here we are in this age of Lucifer. Everything's wonderful. Theoretically, he's managing life. Everything seems to be going well. He's our protector. And then things change. And you'll see, again, reading the book of Ezekiel, it's Ezekiel 28, or reading in Isaiah 14, you're going to see that sin developed in Lucifer's heart. And again, Lucifer is an angel, right? Sin developed in his heart. And it says he wanted to be worshipped like God. Again, another thing, Why? You have to know that, there's people.
Yeah,
He had to be worshipped by
something,
somebody.
Right.
Right.
There was something, yeah.
Right. So I think it's pretty clear there was mankind-ish races there. Lucifer wanted to be ruled, he wanted to be worshipped by them. He wanted to continue to rule this planet. He got lifted up in pride. That's what the Bible says, is that initial sin was pride. So it talks about he eventually convinces a third of the angels to follow him. So let's camp there for a second. The Bible says the angels, these are spiritual creations. There are innumerable companies of them. It's unbelievable number of these angels. And Lucifer got a third of them to leave, the Bible says, their first estate, right? And to come down and join him on earth. Now, the question is what did he do? The Bible says it's through merchandising, through the violence of his merchandising. So what is that merchandising that caused angels to want to leave heaven, to leave this relationship with God that they've known for maybe 13.8 billion years? We don't know. Why would they leave? Do you have any thoughts on that?
You know that I do. I look at what we do know about Satan and how he, what he said to Eve to get to her to fall. He kind of challenged, like, did God surely say, that you weren't allowed to eat there? He kind of put in her that God's kind of keeping her from something, that there's this knowledge that would be more beneficial for her to gain this knowledge than to be obedient to God. So it's kind of what, so obviously I would say that would all obviously root it in pride. And then we fast forward to the life of Jesus, and Satan tempted him by saying, if you worship me, I will give you all of this. So he was like promising Jesus like rule and reign of nations and of the earth,
world.
Right? So I kind of believe, or I would, think it was like that pride, that worship of self, that desire to have kind of like a God of yourself to rule. And he's a complete liar, but I think he was obviously very convincing to these angels. And I know you have a theory that I think is really compelling.
Right. So
as well.
Clearly Satan has this convincing power to set people up. He set these angels up as their own God, and he lied to them. And he's very convincing, and he's still doing that today. But the Bible does say the violence of his merchandising. And I personally believe, we have to jump to Genesis 6, where Genesis 6 is way ahead of where we are right now. We're talking about the age of earth, the age of Lucifer. Genesis 6 is well out of that. But there's something it talks about in Genesis 6, how the angels, the sons of God, came down and saw the daughters of man, which are women, that they're beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, and they procreated with them and created Nephilim. We're going to get into that in a future episode on Nephilim, all right? But the Bible is very clear about this in Genesis 6, that angels came down from heaven, had sexual relations with human women.
Took the form of some kind of physical body.
Right. So the Bible is very clear that angels can take on physical form here on planet. So on planet Earth. So angels came down, had sexual relations with women, and that created a corrupted being called a Nephilim. Again, we're going to get into all that. That happened after Adam and Eve. We have potentially 13.8 billion years
Where that could have happened.
Yeah. And why would he do it after Adam and Eve and not have done it before?
Right.
I personally believe that draw for those angels, besides the, hey, you can be your own God on this planet, like, self-empowerment and whatnot. I personally believe he convinced those angels to come down by offering up these human-like creations that he had created through evolution. That's what I believe.
Yeah, like you could create something.
Right. So we offer exactly. So we offer these angels. You can come down. You can have sexual relations with these beings that I've created, and you can create life, which is something that angels are never supposed to do. And so I truly, truly believe that the angels came down to earth. They had relations with, just call them Neanderthal women for lack of a better term right there. And just like in Genesis 6, where we know that it created these corrupt beings, that the procreation created corrupt beings, I think the exact same thing happened here. And so now you have spirit beings, angels, taking on physical form, having sexual relations with, again, physical beings, call them Neanderthal women, and it creates a corrupted child, if you will. You have a part spirit, part physical thing that was, of course, they're called Nephilim after Adam and Eve. I don't know if it was the same thing back then. Let's just say they're Nephilim again. It's just a corrupted being that has half spirit, half physical. It has never has supposed to have existed ever, right? And now it's being birthed onto the planet.
Right.
And the Bible is very clear about the Nephilim corrupting everything they touch. And in fact, we have another book we're going to be talking about in a future podcast called the Book of Enoch. Well, the Book of Enoch describes these Nephilim and what they do pretty darn well. And it's very clear that they corrupt nature. They have sex with everything that moves. They corrupt everything they touch. They kill any type of human-ish being around. They kill everything. They eat all the animals. It says it corrupts nature completely. So,
were they cannibals either? I can't remember.
Oh, I'm sure they are. I'm sure they were everything.
And they're giants.
They're giants. Yeah. Exactly right. Well, that we know about in post Adam and Eve, which we're going to get to. We don't know this age of Lucifer,
right?
Corrupted being, right?
Right. Yeah.
But just everybody just imagine you have this half spirit, half physical being, and they're being birthed at an unbelievable rate because you have a third of the angels coming down. This is not a small number. It's not like we're talking about 50 angels here. We're talking about probably hundreds of millions of angels coming down to planet Earth. You know, that third that Lucifer convinced, and they're having sexual relations with these beings, Neanderthal beings or whatever you want to call them, across the planet. They're creating all these corrupted children. These corrupted children are growing up, corrupting the earth, corrupting nature, and they're having children again. And guess what happens when they die? Picture this. These things have a spirit. Now, up until now, as you mentioned earlier, nothing had a spirit. God didn't breathe his spirit into mankind until after Adam, well, to Adam and Eve and later, right?
Right.
These are animals. Animals don't have a spirit. But now we have something that does. We have this corrupted offspring of angel and Neanderthal that does have a spirit. It's a corrupted half spirit. And when they die, this spiritual realm is there now where they're going to live. Heaven's not letting them in, right? They're corrupted. They never were supposed to be. We're going to have a conversation right now. I don't think hell existed at this point.
Right.
Why would it? So where do these beings go when they die and now their spirit, this corrupted spirit, is left?
They're floating in the atmosphere.
Yeah. The Bible
right?
talks about like they're searching through the dusty, the dusty grounds. They have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about demons much later on in this podcast, but we might drop a little hint there. You want to know what a demon is? You may have just discovered it. You've got these spiritual creations and there's nowhere to go for them. Right. And hell hasn't been created yet. So they're stuck here on this planet with nowhere to go. Oh, maybe just creeped out some folks there, but I think we're gonna talk about it much more down the road. But I think we're going to find that is some of the demonic forces that we're dealing with today. That's them, and they reside in this spirit realm. People talk about ghosts and they talk about poltergeists and all this other stuff. Well, yeah, there might be some truth to that.
Okay, so just to wrap this up, because we really don't know a lot of this stuff. I mean, it's fun to talk about, and there's such a great book called The Lucifer Project by John Flagg that takes part of this, what we can surmise or what we can assume this, in this gap in the age of Lucifer, and you write this really fun fictional story as a result of that, or part, But there is this crossover between fiction and truth and reality and science, and you have it all in there. So it's a really fun read. So if you haven't got the Lucifer Project, please get that. But to sum it up, we have dinosaurs in this era. We have like the very, very old fossils.
Yes.
We have the Big Bang, possibly at the beginning of it.
Yep.
Possibly. We have evolution of man, possible, in this Neanderthal man, the Homo sapien, like we have that. And now you're saying that we quite possibly have demons coming out of that, a demonic spiritual realm that would still be here.
Correct.
That's still,
Yeah.
That's
and
really.
And I'm going to, again, we're just going to drop a little breadcrumb here for a future episode. But we have proof on this earth today in South Africa. We have a 50 million year old footprint. And it looks pretty clear that it was not a regular human being that created this footprint. But we'll get to that down the road, because there's some proof of what I'm saying is quite possible.
What about that comes later, the giants. So so you're talking about the footprint being like a Nephilim giant.
Yeah, so I'm going to make we don't know, but I'm going to make the argument that what we know is Nephilim after Adam and Eve, I think was also the same Nephilim before Adam and Eve in this age of Lucifer. I do believe they were giants because we have a footprint that's 50 million years old in South Africa today that's giant. And I think it's pretty clear that's what it came from the Nephilim.
Like, what's that one show on a History Channel? What is it? The alien one.
Ancient Aliens?
Ancient Aliens, which is a little hokey. It's a little weird.
Right.
But some of those, don't they talk about like these, cities that were like, how were they built? How did they move these rocks and things like that? So maybe possibly that happened during this age, you think?
Hey, this age could be 13.8 billion years in length.
Yeah.
Mankind went from mud huts to outer space and atomic power in 6,000 years. Who knows what happened back in this age of Lucifer? But I do want to swing back to, we have a third of the angels coming down, doing all this bad stuff, right? Well, what's interesting, where we kind of end this age, is Lucifer decides to attack heaven. That's how egomaniacal, or what's the word? Egotistical, that's the word. He gets so lifted up in pride that he thinks he can be God, he can attack God. It's crazy to think. But those third of the angels and Lucifer turn around and they assault heaven. And apparently it was effective enough that the Bible talks about how the blood of Christ had to cleanse heaven because some of these evil forces were able to get into heaven. So we don't know. There's not much detail on what happened. What we do know that they attacked heaven, and we also do know that they lost. So the Bible talks about how Lucifer was sent back down to the earth. Again, that's where he was almost like he had a covenant with God to be the protector of the earth. And so he was sent back. God's not going to break his covenant. So Lucifer was sent back after this attack. But now he's known as his fully corrupted being, devil or Satan.
And he's kicked out of heaven.
He's kicked out of heaven, right?
For good.
He's sent back down to the earth, his territory. He's now renamed, like I said, the devil or Satan. The angels were kicked out as well, and they were sent back to earth. And so, again, we want to talk about demons. So now we have possibly these corrupted Nephilim. We also have angels that were sent back. And the Bible is pretty clear. There's different ranks and powers of demons. Well, we just talked about two of them right now. And so the angels are sent back to earth. And it's really hard.
The third of the angels.
The third of the angels. Yeah, the third of the angels that joined Lucifer. They were all kicked out after this battle. They were kicked back to earth. And now God has a problem to deal with this earth. It is a fully corrupted, again, I would say because of it's the sin of Lucifer. And then it's the angels coming down, and then it's this corruption of these Nephilim being birthed and corrupting everything around them. God has this fully corrupted planet now. It was never meant to be like this, but the actions of Lucifer have completely corrupted it. And God has to deal with this. What is he going to do with it? Because there's a scripture talking about God did not create, I think it's in Jeremiah, God did not create the earth to be in vain. He wanted it to be a perfect place. He wanted it to be inhabited. Mm-hmm. And so he has this problem. This earth that he's created is completely corrupted. He's got to do something with it. He has to start over, which means he has to end the earth that was then. Starting to sound like 2 Peter, which we talked about in our last podcast. The earth that was then had to be destroyed. God did it through a flood. It says very clearly that 2 Peter talked about that, how he flooded the earth. So God sends this massive flood to this fully corrupted planet. The water envelops it, kills off everything.
Yeah, no man left alive.
There's no man left alive. There's no animals left alive. Everything is wiped out. And now we have this, what was a fully corrupted planet full of death and corruption and darkness, starting to sound like Genesis 1:2 now, isn't it? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. Well, we covered those 3 words in our first episode. We know clearly we had this corrupted, destroyed planet that was full of death and misery and covered in water. And this is now what we call Lucifer's flood. Lucifer was sent back to earth. The angels were sent back to earth. The corrupted third of the angels, they were all sent back to earth. Now God has to judge this planet. He does so via this massive flood. It's called Lucifer's flood, and it ends it all. So that is the end of the epoch, if you will, of Lucifer. He's now Satan. He's now the devil. And so let's wrap it up. What does science say 13.8 billion years ago? We have the Big Bang. We have the formation of the planet 4.5 billion years ago. We have life formed somewhere around 3.7 billion years ago. Science has never been able to answer how life began. It's just somehow started. Something that was dead somehow became alive. Of course, I'm joking a little bit about that because it's one of those difficult questions that no one has an answer to unless you're a Christian. And then you just say, well, it's pretty clear. The Bible says God created life.
Right.
But we have this life beginning, and then somewhere around 2 to 5 million years ago, we see this evolution of apes into a version of mankind, a non-spirit-filled version of mankind. And then we have the angels coming down to join up with Lucifer. I believe it's because they saw those beings and they wanted to create life with them. Again, we don't know for sure, but what we do know is it led to a fully corrupted planet. Again, we're talking millions and millions of years. This is not difficult to imagine them having enough time to do this. Fully corrupted planet. We have the assault on heaven, and God has to judge it all. The question is, do we have any science on Lucifer's flood? We're making some pretty big claims here. All this stuff happened. We do core samples, drilling all the time. Shouldn't we have some evidence of there being this thing called Lucifer's flood?
I'm so excited for the next. That is for the next video.
That's exactly right.
And I'm so fascinated because, yeah, you went on a hunt to look for some answers here. And so we just talked a lot about spiritual things. And then next podcast, we will talk about the science.
Yeah, we're going to talk about both the science and the spiritual thing of this Lucifer's flood specifically. I want to know, is there data to prove that Lucifer's flood actually occurred?
On this earth.
On this earth.
Right.
And that's our next podcast.